Let's do a recap, Lindsay. What do we talk about in this episode?
Oh, we did a lot.
Oh yeah, so much. So in continuation of the last episode, we talked briefly about what you did in China and then how you felt when you returned to the US.
Yeah. Yeah.
And some cultural identity shifts.
Yes. Yeah. And like how I got into my role now as a DSO and some advice for students, and then thinking about the sense of belonging and home, and how can we be part of welcoming others too, and like kind of a call to all of you American domestic friends.
That's right.
To providing that space for students. So
welcome to Chai with Ping. This is Ping Robert. In this podcast, I cover immigrant stories, cross-cultural experiences, and minority issues. Join me with a cup of chai and take a listen. All right. Ready? I'm going to do the intro.
Go ahead.
Welcome back to Chat with Ping. My name is Ping. Thank you so much for tuning in to my show. And then if you're a returning listener, welcome. And then if you're a new listener, please hit that subscribe button on wherever you listen to your podcast podcast from. And then you can also find me on social media on Facebook or Instagram. If you want to show me an email without revealing your social media handle, sure. My email is also in the episode note. It's chaiwithping@gmail.com. Feel free to sponsor me if you want to give me some encouragement and support. And then recently, Spotify just opened this new feature that you can rate me. So when you open Spotify, and then there will be a 5-star button, or it says rate, I think, and then you can click that and give me 5 stars. So give me some support so other people can see if other listeners already like my show. All right. So today we're welcoming a returning guest. She used to be in China, and then she spent a whole year with a fruitful life there, and her stories are just phenomenal. So I would encourage you, if you haven't listened to her first episode, the episode number and the name is in the episode notes. So feel free to click that one and then come back to this episode after you finish the first one. So let's welcome back Lindsey Hobson.
Woo! Happy to be here. Yeah. I'm back.
Yes, you're back. Thank you so much for sharing wonderful stories in our last episode. I learned so much about it. And then I really love how truly reflective and honest about your feelings and thoughts as you're processing your journey in China. And then so our episode today is going to focus more on like returning from China and then how your life has been different. But just to kind of recap what you did in China, let's talk about it. What did you do in China? And then when was it?
Sure. Yeah. So I spent 2015 to 2016 in China on a Fulbright US student scholar program. So it was 14 months. It was a grant project. So I was interviewing Chinese students about their experience as they're preparing to come to the US. So I lived as a foreign student, interviewing Chinese students. And then they, after that year, came to America to study. So I was kind of looking at their pre-arrival experience, which kind of led into the work I do now, which is welcoming students.
Yeah. And then you learned 4 months intensive
that's right.
Mandarin as well. That was really hard.
Yes.
You travel so much around different cities in China, and you saw different faces, different cities and cultures as well. And so how did you feel when you first landed back home?
Yeah, I think one of the things I didn't really expect was how much culture shock I would have on the reverse side. So coming back to the US, experiencing, it was a year. So it was a significant amount of time that things had changed a little bit, but everything looked pretty familiar as far as like my physical environment. But of course, everyone here in the States did not experience what I experienced abroad. So there was a little bit of a disconnect, even though I had told them and shared stories throughout my time. I was like, but they don't get it. They just don't get it. They don't know what I've gone through. They can't understand why I do things differently now. And I think one of the biggest pieces of culture shock on the reverse side was driving again. Like I had spent a whole year without a car, and it was so freeing to be able to walk and to take the subway. And I actually really enjoyed it. A lot of people like hate that. And they're like, I wish I could go back to, car life again. But I felt the reverse. I felt very frustrated that I had to go buy a car when I got back to America and just driving. And then I would just complain about the inconveniences of America because China is so convenient. You can pay on your phone for everything. You don't even need a wallet. So all you need is your phone. And now I think we've modernized. People are using, like Apple Pay and everything like that. So there's been a lot more, I think. And especially because of the pandemic, it's really pushed people to use like digital means to pay for things and stuff like that. But man, everything was so much more convenient in China, especially traveling and getting around, and just the public services that were available were much greater in China. So I missed that. I missed the convenience of China and like being able to get food at any hour of the day, and just, yeah, people, even the life is so alive. Like one of the ways I've described China is it's so alive. And you come back to America, and my family's in the suburbs. So back in suburban America, it's just so dead. There's just not a lot of life. Okay.
It's very quiet indeed. And after 8 p.m., yeah, a lot of things just kind of close down.
And I also, the funny thing was, Ping, I would find myself like drawn to Asian faces. Like I would see an Asian in my very white suburban neighborhood outside of Cleveland. And I would be like, just like really like staring at Asians. And I felt so awkward. Like these people are probably like, why is this girl looking at me? And I had this, again, like being surrounded by Chinese faces for a whole year. I don't know, like my attention shifted more. So I started to notice people like more like people of color, but especially Asians. Like I was just like more drawn to them. And they were definitely in our community, minority, very rare to see like a lot of Asian faces. So it was like a culture shock in that sense of like who I was drawn to, or like I got really excited. Like maybe they can speak Chinese, but like probably not. So like there were a couple times where I attempted to use Chinese with someone who I thought was Chinese, and it went really poorly. So I don't do that unless I can tell someone has like an accent. Okay.
I can totally feel you. I can relate to that because like after spending 3 years in India, and when I see Indians over here, I just kind of get drawn to, and especially we met at Vision conference, right? So it's like, there's so many Indian students. I'm like, I'm like back to my second home. But then it's like, I think they also feel awkward because like, they don't know me, but I feel like I can relate to their culture in some ways, or speak some Hindi and all that. It's just, it's awkward.
Yes. Yeah. And I just felt bad. I was like, okay, I'm sorry. And like, it's simple things like staring. Like I would look at people longer, and I was like, oh, this is so awkward. I was aware I was doing it, but I just felt bad. Like, oh, I'm sorry. I just miss Asians. Okay.
Was it hard to describe how you're feeling to other people, even though they heard some of the stories, but like when you're reflecting and processing your experiences, was it hard to express?
Yeah, I definitely felt like that. I think I started talking more with even people back in China. Like when I left for China, I had a really hard time, like kind of cutting off communication with my American friends. And it was the same when I came back to the US. I was still talking a lot with my Chinese friends because I had just literally moved from a plane ride from one like country to the other. It's like we're literally the other side of the world. So even though like last week I was with these people, now I'm not. And so there was like, I had a hard time detaching from China, I think. And so when I talked to Americans, and they're like, why are you still like talking about China? Or like they were excited to hear some stories in the beginning, but then after that, they're kind of like done listening. And I'm like, yeah, but I'm still there. Like my whole heart is still in China. Like I'm not back in America yet. So there was a lot of that feeling. And I remember meeting a student. I came back in October. And then it was in October after that. So it was October 2017. I flew back to China on a plane with a student from Purdue. We were both going to China to visit. And I remember like getting so excited to talk with him. We had the flight there and the flight back together. And like, I was complaining still about America. So a year after, I remember it was a full year, at least after coming back to the States, where I still felt like, don't want to be in America. Like, wish I was back in China. So even after a year, I still felt that pull of like, China is home. And then I went through this huge transition about where is home. Yeah.
Yeah. So like the first year when you came back, what did you do?
So I got back in October, and then I visited some friends on the West Coast, and then I slowly made it back to Cleveland. So I think it was like second week of November. Okay. I ended up back in Cleveland with my parents because I had no job. Yeah. You know, I don't have an apartment to live in. And then I had to go buy a car. So I had borrowed, I think at the time I was using my parents' car, but I started teaching English. So I got a TESOL job by February. But through that time, so I guess it was like, end of November, then the holidays came. I was job searching. I applied to a lot of different positions, but one of the positions I had considered was becoming a DSO, a designated school official, but I wasn't sure if I really wanted to do it because a lot of this job requires legal things, compliance. It's kind of like enforcing the law in some ways. Not that we're like police, but that we have to help students comply to the rules and regulations of living in the US. And I didn't like that part. I had done an internship during my master's program in the international office, and I looked at all the kind of different roles. And I really liked the admission side. I really liked the study abroad side because it was more like exploratory and vision casting and future planning. But the DSO job was a lot of compliance and like making sure students are following the rules. And I was like, that is not me. So initially I did not apply to this type of job. I just went back into teaching for a little bit. But most of the jobs available were this designated school official role at universities. And I had done the training for it. So I had some training. I didn't have like experience yet, but I had done the training and I thought, this is not me.
Hey, let's back up a little bit because I think a lot of listeners will be like, what is DSO? So just put it simply, in the international office on a higher education campus, usually they need to, support international students because they have a different visa and immigration status. So DSO is there to advise, help them to get through the immigration process. And also if they have like questions for work, for studies, how many credits, or if they can take a leave of absence, they can talk to advisors. So I think they refer you guys as DSO as well as advisors, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So then basically you do a lot of document checking, updating I-20s, which is a required document for internationals to, is it only for students?
The I-20?
Yeah. I don't think it's for employers, right? Yeah.
No. And then there's some students that come on like J1 visas.
That's right.
It's for study, but they have something called the DS 2019. It's a different form.
Yeah. So
they're called AROs, similar to being a DSO, but same. Again, you're an advisor for them.
Got it. So you're kind of compiling paperwork and making sure that they are on the right side of the immigration status and to maintain that status and also legally stay here in the US.
Yes.
Yeah. I admire you guys because I know right now I'm the assistant to a DSO. So all you do is like checking computers, checking records, updating information, talking to students. It's just a lot of background work. And then it can be frustrating because some students could be asking same questions or some people are not really aware what their rights or responsibilities are. Yeah. So then how did you land on this job? Because you said that you love teaching, but then you went for that way.
I went that way. Yeah. So it was kind of, again, so going through this transition after being back, I'm looking at different positions. And I really felt like, again, this like, where is home kind of thing that kind of happened for about 3 years. So I could talk more about that piece. But as far as like career wise, I had applied to a bunch of positions and then it got to the point where I had interviewed for a lot of them, got to the final round and they went with like the other candidate for some jobs. Some of them, there was one position in Kentucky where I would have worked with American students planning to go to China. So it was like a Chinese program manager. So I would have been helping them for that. So I looked at different types of roles, but then I had someone in my church who just approached me and said, hey, my daughter's leaving this position as a DSO and they are looking for somebody out in Chicago. And I'm like, okay, well, I could apply for that, I guess. Cause she was a one-person office. So when you're a one-person office, you have to do everything. So I thought, okay, so if I do the one-person office, I get to do the program planning. I get to like really get to know the students. It's not just the paperwork because in big institutions, there are 10 people that would do my job and they're really just paper processing. And then there's a whole another office that does all the fun stuff, the programming side of things. But because this office only had one person, I thought, oh, that's a good experience. I'll get to see everything. Right. So I ended up applying for the job, had like a 45-minute interview and then got the job. So I moved out to Chicago, not really knowing what I was getting into because it was my first time working as a DSO. So I was like, I'm going to try it. So,
and then, so you just start working?
So then I started working and it was like, I would keep running into these questions. Was like, I don't know the answer. So a lot of our job as a designated school official is to kind of interpret the regulations. So if a student is coming over, they need a certain amount of money and they have to have certain sponsorships and like all this stuff has to go through the paperwork just to get the initial I-20. And then once you're here, you have to enroll in classes full time. So it's pretty basic rules, like just stay full time. But then the question is, well, what is full time? So for every student at every level, there's a different interpretation. So if you're an undergraduate student, that means 12 credit hours. If you're a master's student, that means 9. And if you're a PhD student who's writing your dissertation, who's like not going to classes, how do you prove you're full time? So it became all of this like, well, what does it mean in this case, in this case, in this case? So it was a lot of problem solving and just adjusting to the system, because I had bachelor's to PhD level students on F1 visas. And then I also had some J1 visiting scholars who would just come over for a couple weeks to a couple months. And then they would be just staying in the dorms and kind of doing their own research, similar to what I did when I was in China. So it was kind of like trying to figure out how all the nuances are with these regulations and how to assist students. And so it got very overwhelming being a one-person office. So I'll tell you that. I got an intern. She started helping me. And actually, the funny thing is I left that position and I'm now at the community college out here. And she took over for me in my role. So it was really good because I kind of was able to help train her. But when I got there, I didn't have a lot of support because we had just one PDSO, which is the primary designated school official. They're like the head. But this was also a VP at the school. So he was just not available to help with everything.
What? Wow. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's
so I kind of felt like I didn't get a lot of training. So I was just learning on the job. And if I had a question, it would take me a couple of days to get an answer because I just didn't know, like, okay, well, it says here in the rule, but what does that mean here at the institutions? There's a lot of nuances and like when students start classes and like, are they full-time in the summer? If they come in the summer term, does it count or does it have to be fall term? So there's a lot of stuff to figure out, but I also did get to do a lot of the programming. So I got to meet families and a lot of the students, especially at the PhD and like master's level, they came with their families. So it was also their spouse and their kids. And so that was really fun too, is getting to meet students from all over the world. And I realized like there is more of that personal side of the experience, not just the paperwork. And so as I describe my job now, I would say if I was wearing a t-shirt, the front would say mom. Okay. I'm like the first person they meet, you know, I'm the one that they come to with all their questions. But then on the back side of the shirt, it says Terminator. Okay. Because inside of CVIS, the system where all the records are, you are terminated if you violate your status and aren't able to correct the issue. Okay. So if a student doesn't follow the rules, they get terminated. And it's a very intense kind of word, like terminated. So I tell them I'm kind of like mom and dad, right? Like I'm the welcoming person. I'm there to help, there to support. First person you see when you hit the ground. But then I also have that power to terminate you if you're not following the rules. So the uncomfortability of the role is like, I want you to succeed. I want you to do well. But if you fail to follow the rules, then I have to follow the rules, which is the consequences. You're terminated and need to leave the US. That's so right. It's stressful in the sense that I feel like I'm always caught trying to help the student to comply to the rules so that they make the right choices. But ultimately, like I learned, I was so stressed out in the first role because I was like trying to like save the students from their consequences essentially. And I couldn't. So I had to allow myself to like, you know, let the consequences kind of happen for the students. And again, notifying them, letting them know like, hey, you're at risk of losing your status, but eventually like needing to terminate some people from choices that they've made. So the role is hard because you want to see, it's like having your own children, like you want to see them succeed. And when they make poor choices, you have to terminate the record. So it's a tension for me all the time, as far as like trying to help support students.
And I'm curious, like how your experience in China and all that shape your experience as a DSO. Do you see students differently? Like, because you were doing admission work before you went to China. Yeah. Do you see there's a difference?
Yeah, there definitely is. I think because of the admission side, I was working in my previous role. I got to see, you know, kind of the excitement around coming and what do they want to gain and what do they want to achieve. And then like getting here to the US and then realizing like you're really limited in what you can do. And especially if you're coming from a financial background where you don't have a lot of money, it's really hard to survive in the United States. And so there's a lot of students who struggle, you know, to pay their bills, to find access to resources here. And so it's more of like the ugly reality of life versus the anticipated beautiful future and dream of coming to America. And so they get to experience what it's like and to be on some campuses like very isolated from other students from their country. So now at the community college level, I have a lot of students from different countries. Like we have 36 countries represented out of 80 students. So there's a huge variety, and like there's only 5 Chinese. It's not a big portion of our population. In fact, we have more Koreans than we have Chinese. So I also feel like the Chinese in the community college, if there's only 5, they can't really isolate because there's too few of them, and there's not as many resources because we're out in the community college setting, right? We're farther from the city, we're out in the suburbs. So students have really, they've had a different experience, I think, maybe than I did, living in a big city and having access to things. And and the dream, right? Like the dream that I was researching, like the dream isn't as, is as like smooth, I guess, like making the transition to the US is not as smooth as students hope for or anticipate.
I want to circle back to, we talk about home, like your cultural identity, or how do you feel you belong?
Sure. Yeah. So part of that, making that transition to any place, is you're trying to find a sense of belonging. You're trying to find a sense of home. And for me, as a Christian, as a Christ follower, I really have this feeling of like, we are not just like citizens of our respective countries, but we're actually citizens of heaven. So in Philippians 3:20, we talk about this, like, for our citizenship is in heaven, from which we also eagerly await a savior, the Lord Jesus Christ. So as Christians, we have the sense that we are foreigners, we are aliens on this earth. So I've already like kind of learned that growing up and walking with Jesus. I feel like that's part of my identity, is like recognizing my citizenship isn't just American. Okay. It's like at this bigger family, this bigger citizenship. And another like influential author that really speaks to this, his name is Miroslav Volf. He's a Croatian theologian. And he wrote in his book, Exclusion and Embrace, that Christians are not simply aliens to their own culture. They are aliens that are at home in every culture because they're open to every culture. So part of my role of like finding home and finding place and finding belonging has been in this being at home everywhere and not really in one place. And so that has like really given me like, I don't know, kind of relief from that culture shock of like going to China, coming back to the US, and then recognizing like my home is not here. It's not in America, and it's not in China. Actually, for me, like my faith is that my home is in God. Like it's actually in him. And so in Chinese, like it's like 他是我的家, he's my home, but also like this 居所 idea. He's like my dwelling place. And I feel like I've learned that through being like living abroad, then coming back to the US, and then working with international students. They're still trying to find that sense of home. We all are searching for it. It's like a very human thing to look for a place to belong and looking for home. And so what I'm like trying to do now in my role is really to create that, like with my students, like how do I create home for them in America? Because this is like a second home. Like Ping, you're saying India was like your second home, right? Like you do feel at home in the place where you are. So there is like a physical connection to the place you're at, and so like trying to do that for my students is to like be able to see them and know them and care about what they care about what they're going through, get excited with them, celebrate with them about things that they're achieving, but really being a place of home. Right. And I think as Christians, that's part of what we can do is like be open to every culture and at home for every culture, because like God's love is for every culture and for every person. And so there is like this welcome of like you're home wherever you are kind of thing. So that has really been an idea I think that's developed for me professionally, but also like personally in my experience abroad and then being back here in the States. And then that kind of transitions into like, here we are now, how can we make home for students that are here? Because they're feeling those same, like culture shock issues, the same type of transition that I faced. And if I can use an analogy, it's like you come from a circle culture and you go into the square culture, but you change, you're neither. So you become a triangle. So there's kind of like this triangle culture that I find not only because I was living abroad and now come back to America and I don't feel like an American anymore, right? I feel like this triangle third culture person, but my students feel that too. Like they're no longer just from their home country, and they are no longer like just American either. They're not Americans. So they're in between, they're in that triangle space. So I think I found this career with international education to be a really good fit because I'm a triangle person. So I feel like that third culture, that triangle dynamic is really like part of my life now in like this professional sense.
So what do you usually do to support them or to include them? Are there any examples that like you see students kind of change along the time?
Yeah, I think, and I have like a list of things I would advise for students, so we can get to that later, but
Yeah.
just like getting involved, like for students, I encourage them to find the things that they love and that they used to do in their home culture that they can do here. So for some of them, it's really simple things like, okay, what sports did you enjoy playing back home, right? How can you get engaged with the basketball team here if you play basketball? I have a lot of students who play sports, and so they've been able to connect with the sports teams. If you're a gamer, like we have League of Legends club on campus, connect with people that have shared interests with you, because that's where you start to connect. And then it also helps with that language, right? That language acquisition. And then also like creating friendships with locals, because when you have local friends, then you feel more connected to the place that you're at. If you continue to stay in your like home culture's kind of expat community, you don't really get that connection. So I always encourage students to find out like, and some of them are still like discovering that, right? They're 18, they still don't know who they are, right? And but we all are discovering ourselves, but just that initial shock of like, I used to live with my parents, now I have to live alone, like how do I cook for myself? Everything. It's totally a huge lifestyle shift. But to find the common rhythms and like things that you find fun and exciting in your home culture, like they're happening here in America. So how can you come together with others to like appreciate those things? So that's what I try to do. I try to connect them. So I just say I'm also a connector. Like, how do I connect my students to the things that they find valuable? And there's resources on campus for them. So I think that's one big thing. And then also to talk about it. Like I'm there to talk about the transition. And I'm like, I can empathize with them because I've done it too. So there's also this piece of like, I understand your frustration. So yesterday I was on a call with a student and he is from Colombia. And I speak Spanish as well. So I was talking to him in my broken Spanish, and he's talking to me in his broken English. And it was like, he was telling me how overwhelming everything is, like the systems and how do I navigate these online classrooms? And like, I just found out I have all this homework I didn't do. And I said, don't worry, like take it one step at a time. Everything's new. And like, don't put so much pressure on yourself. So like one of the things I'm there to reassure the student is like, be patient, with the process and like, trying to meet them where they're at. So if I can speak their language, I'll speak their language with them, especially if they're a low level English speaker, because it just makes them more comfortable. So trying to bridge the gaps, trying to bridge the places of difficulty, it's not just like, okay, here's your paper and now you're here and here's the rules. Good luck. It's a lot of just processing every challenge together. And then again, trying to connect them with resources as much as possible. And so I'm that first point of contact, but there are more supports. And then my goal is to help train those support people to recognize the student need and how the student is different maybe than an American student and what struggles they're going through, like just to expose them to like the international student journey, if that makes sense.
Hey, I'm wondering, like, because a lot of us, we come from a very different culture than from the US. So then there are some, I wouldn't say like behaviors, but I guess it's tendencies that, so for example, from my culture, we don't proactively ask questions.
Yeah.
And then for some cultures, like asking questions can be a bit rude, or we don't talk about mental health because it's a taboo in some cultures. Is there any phenomena that you see that are common in the international student population, and then you would say something to those phenomena?
Yeah, I think you hit on two big ones. Asking for help.
Yeah.
So this is like a life motto of mine. And so it's hard because I think Americans are more assertive. Like we're trained to ask for help. When I lived in China, people would say like, oh, you're so courageous because you're traveling on your own or you're like doing stuff. And I'm like, well, we're very assertive in that, like, 한용간, like very courageous in sharing our opinion or advocating for ourselves. So I always tell my students to advocate for themselves. It's a huge cultural shift to do that, to ask for help, or to even like just call me my first name, Lindsey, instead of teacher Lindsey, right? A lot of students want to use formalities with me. And I'm like, really, all the faculty and staff are here to help you. You can call us by our first names. It takes even the hierarchy down to this very like kind of equal level where like people really do want to walk alongside you. And so that's very new for students. So I just talk through that a lot, especially in orientation. We also have a class that I teach that's called Introduction to American College Culture. And so every week I meet with the cohort of new students. So every week, this is like the most beautiful part of my job, is that it's not just the paperwork, it's not just the programming. I actually have a class where I teach So we get to talk about these issues throughout the whole first semester. So we talk about how to like communicate with your professors. Like one of the things I want to change in our curriculum is like how to send an email. Like students don't know how to like properly address a teacher or someone else. Like, how do you communicate? And then we talk about the services that we have. So we have a counseling service program. It's called CAPS at our school. And so they can go and like have appointments, but we bring the CAPS person to class so they can meet them and they can talk about here's ways you can care for your mental health, self-care strategies, all these things. So it starts to break down the like, this taboo about seeking help or support. So I start early with the students and keep reminding them, like, we have support services for you. Like, we're here for you. Please reach out. So part of it is like a transition for them to learn how to do that. But I always encourage students to ask for help and like always ask, like, even if you're just curious, like, please keep asking. So I encourage them a lot. And I do get to see them every week. So to do that. And then this last week, we talked about in class, this idea of comfort zones, learning zones, and then panic zones. And so I encourage them, like, how can you get into your learning zone? So that's their homework this week, is to think about that. So some of them are comfortable in English. For some of them, just speaking English puts them into a learning zone. And for some of them, they're totally panicked, right? Like the student I had yesterday is like, please speak to me in Spanish. I can't even understand how to navigate this classroom. So helping students kind of frame what's going on for them individually, of like, to move into your, learning zone, you're going to need to ask for help. You're going to need to take risks. You're going to have to do things differently. So just trying to prepare them for that. So this is like week, 4 of the semester. And so we're talking about this. So we keep kind of coming back to these ideas, and we'll talk again about like cultural adjustment. Like we addressed it in orientation. We're going to address it again in a couple of weeks. We're going to have, all these support systems come and talk to the students so that they feel comfortable going to those offices. We go visit our on-campus police. We have a police station on campus. So they actually get to go see like a jail cell. They like, this is so cool, right? Like, how do you interact with the police in America, right? That's scary. Things like that. So, yeah.
That is so cool. I would love to learn that, because like in my research, it talks about America 101 or higher education in America 101 that kind of class actually help a lot of international students. Because for me, even like I felt like I could be so international than a lot of Taiwanese students. But when I come here, it's so hard to navigate. And especially it's a private institute and DU is running by the quarter system. I'm like, by the 4th week, we're already preparing for midterm. And so that was a huge shift for me. And then if I had taken that kind of class, that would actually prepare us to be, I guess, mentally ready, or it's like not always in a panic mode.
Right.
So, that is so nice. And then, so do you also build like great relationship with students and see them progress from first year to 4th year, or, for PhD, that could be longer, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So when I first started working, I was at the school that had 2 PhD levels. So some of those students I'm still friends with. I don't work at the school anymore, but the school I'm working at now, the community college, is 2 years. But a lot of them do an extra year of like language study. So that first semester is when they meet me, right? So they immediately attach to me. There's like bonding that happens in that first term. And that's kind of the intention, is that I teach the class as their advisor, because they're going to keep coming back to me throughout those other 2 years, because they're going to need help and support as they go through this transition, because everyone's going to hit culture shock at a different point. Everyone's going to feel like the acculturative stress is kind of the term we use now, of like just adjusting to the US. And so when we have this, it's really nice because, one, the cohort bonds, right? So all these new students come together and they meet every week. So they're going through it together. So it's like, okay, you're all in here. And I told them my class is supposed to be like like, let's exhale, like everything's been overwhelming the last couple, weeks, days, whatever. We're back together. And so it does create like a home base for them, where they can build trust with me. They get to know me, and then I get to know them, and they're writing journals. They're reflecting on their experience. So I also get to hear them reflect back on what they want to achieve and what they're going to do, in the US. So I could even say like, hey, you wrote, week 2, you wanted to do this. How's that going? Right. So I can check in with them about their personal goals and their journey here, of like, hey, you said this was really a struggle a couple weeks ago. How's it going now? So I have a very personal connection with my students because of that. And then once they move on and transition into regular college level classes, they still have that connection with our office. So that's been, huge. Like you said, like it'd be so great if you had that class. They actually at our community college used our model to create that for the entire first year experience for students. So they actually replicated the class, but I've been teaching it now for like 6 semesters. So it's been around since 2018. So it's still relatively new as far as like implementation, but the college saw such great results. Like our retention is like 90% because of this, because they actually are getting transitioned into the like whole campus culture, not just at one orientation, but this whole semester class that really is able to like go through this process slowly, but also at the same time build this framework for success for the students so that they don't feel like they're by themselves, right? Just plunging in.
Absolutely. Because it's all about the first phase and navigation. It's like how they navigate around campus and find resources. And then that's also the time that they need the most support and services, because after they kind of get used to the US system, then they can navigate on their own. That's wonderful. I'll look into that, because I think reflective learning is also a big key. And I found this study also talking about when they have this PhD program and then they have a cohort system, and then one professor is trying to get the international students or even just students to write down what they have been learning about inclusivity or diversity education. And then I think that will be so helpful for international students to actually verbalize their thoughts and feelings, and that would be internalized into learning. So great idea, Lindsey.
Yeah, I didn't create it. Okay, that's my boss. I have to thank him for that. He is the one who advocated for this at our school. But yeah, it's been really helpful.
Yeah. And then you talk about a little bit of the tips that you will give to international students when they're preparing to come here or after they settle a little bit. What would you say to them?
So part of that, like creating home, creating belonging, is what I'm trying to do is like get to know them, because once I know them, then I can help connect them. I can help address their concerns. So one of the things I tell students is allow yourself to be seen and known. And a lot of times, like that is not promoted in your home culture. You're supposed to be like hidden or quiet or silent, like your voice is not valued. And so in the United States, I think that's a huge shift too, of like, we're trying to do more, I think, even with mental health in general, like across the society. But allowing yourself to be seen and known is really like, it could be scary because it's very vulnerable, like to share how you're really doing. But to seek out people who you feel comfortable with, who are safe people that you can share with. And so I would just encourage international students to find places to be that. Okay, it doesn't necessarily have to be with your international student advisor, but find friends where you can really like share your heart, because you're not going to connect if you continue to keep distance or continue to isolate. So part of that's asking for help, which we talked about, and then taking risks. So challenging yourself and speaking English. We have an international student ambassador program where international students go into the American classrooms and talk about a topic like healthcare or education in their home country. And it's really scary because you have to do public speaking with a bunch of strangers, right? And so I told them, like, this is a great way to challenge yourself, like take a risk. So two of my new students, were like, I don't know. I'm like, you can do it, and they decided that they're going to do it. So next week they're going to speak in a panel, which is great. And they just came to America, right? So it's really nerve wracking, but doing things like that, like I would say, take risks, challenge yourself. If there's programs like that to get involved on your campus, do it, and you're going to grow so much through that. And also like making friends, don't be afraid to approach people. And I do think like culturally, like it's a little uncomfortable. And so Americans have to work on it too, but don't be afraid to make a friend and to strike up a conversation. And I'd say like get involved. That's like the second thing. So allow yourself to be seen and known, then get involved. So we were talking about connecting students to clubs. Find people who have similar interests to you, because that's where you're going to find, again, that stronger sense of belonging, because you have something to relate over. And then be kind and gentle to yourself. So that's like my third tip. The cultural adjustment, it takes time. So be gentle. Like I cried every day when I was like, I can't learn Chinese and speak at a 25-year-old proficiency. Like I'm at a 3-month-old. So like, take your time. Don't worry too much about where you're at. Okay. You will see improvement, but it takes time. So give yourself that time, like be kind to yourself. And like, you're not alone in that. There are many students going through that. So like part of our model is we allow the students to come together once a week. And so they can kind of talk to each other about how they're doing. But please remember, you're not alone in that transition. So there are people for you who are here to help. And also like the fourth thing is just remember why you came. Like, what are your goals? So I shared this kind of in the other episode if an American wanted to go abroad, but same thing for the international students. Before you leave and when you get here, remember why you came. What are your goals? Like, do you want to learn English? Is that your goal? Is it to get a job? Is it like a long-term immigration plan, which is totally fine, but what are those reasons for coming to America? And those will change, but try to remember why you came, because when you're discouraged, you have to remind yourself again, like, oh yeah, this is why I chose to come to America. This is why I'm here. And go back to that when you start to feel like you're losing your way, because when you come back to like the core reasons of why you're here, what you want to get out of this experience, that really helps drive you to the next step. So if you're getting stuck or you're feeling like I'm so overwhelmed, take a step back and think about what's the small thing you can do today, to make progress towards those goals. So yeah. So I guess just know that we're in this with you. I think on behalf of all international education professionals, like we really do love this stuff. I love international students and I love working with international students. So I don't think anyone goes into this career field who hasn't had an experience abroad already themselves, or who doesn't really get the experience. A lot of people who work in our jobs have lived abroad and do really care and understand your experience. So don't be afraid of us. We're not the police. Okay.
Sometimes you might feel like it, but it's just only for your immigration status.
Exactly. So there is like I was talking about, like the mom Terminator role. Okay. Like, yes, we do hold the power to terminate your record if you disobey the rules, but ultimately, and I tell my students, maintaining your status is your responsibility. I'm here to help support you in that. So I will send you reminders and I will tell you the rules. And if you have a question, you can always ask. Okay. But you are the one making the choices. So there is always that, like, the responsibility is on you to maintain your status, but really, like, we want you to maintain your status. We're rooting for you. We're your cheerleaders. Like, we are the ones who really care about you succeeding in America. So please don't feel like afraid, like we're not just there to bring down the termination on you, right? We're really there to help support. So please, don't be afraid of your DSO, because I know the immigration paperwork is scary, but if you have questions, don't worry, we can walk through it. So
yeah. And then I know that some people are listening to this episode because they care about international students. As domestic people, what would you say to them?
Oh, this is the part that I'm like most excited about. Domestic people, Americans out there listening, make a friend, So I just started this friendship program in October. And this has been my goal for like I've been at my job for 3 years at this community college, but really trying to connect with the local community. Because as I mentioned in my experience, it was so easy to make the transition when I had local Chinese friends. It is the same for international students. When they have local friends and family here that adopt them as part of the family, that's really where they start to feel a sense of home and belonging. And so we can do that as Americans, to be hospitable, to welcome them into our homes, to just have them over for coffee or tea, or just to check in and say like, hey, how are you doing? They need people who care. So I think as Americans, like, we have a long way to go in the hospitality avenue, but look for programs, Americans, who are near campuses. There might already be a program. So like my campus has a friendships family program. Many campuses do. And if they don't, you can actually email the office and see if you can start something or help them out. Like, what are ways you could help the international office to welcome students? We have airport pickups, that we do. And a lot of schools partner with other organizations to do that. There's many international student ministry organizations that also help support international offices. So look at what's available in your area. And really get involved with that if you really care, because that's where the true heart is, right? It's this mutual cultural understanding and welcome and hospitality and love that, we can be sharing. It's really to be available and to be present with students. And so that's what I try to do daily. And I need more Americans to help support, because I've got 80 students and I'm only one person. So remembering that, like, you're there and that you care about them, that's really going to make a difference in their lives. So be a friend.
I just want to add on that, because I am also involved with our local Bridges International Student organization. So it's like for a student club for international students. Yeah. And I talk to volunteers as well. Like, people might ask, what can they actually do with their limited time? There are consistent or regular volunteer options. For example, taking students to supermarkets every week. That's a big thing I've been doing with
Yes.
some students, because like in a winter, there's no way that they can walk for 30 minutes to a supermarket and carry a gallon of milk or some vegetable and back. And then it's just a great help for them. It's like if you make it a routine that every week this time, if who needs to go to the supermarket or to their like Asian specific cuisine supermarkets, that will be really helpful. And then you can also commit the time for a specific one-time service. For example, taking them out for traveling, to hiking. A lot of students don't have cars. So here in Colorado, it's really hard to get to the mountains with public transportation. So driving them to a park, to ice skating, to local events, that can be actually really fruitful for students to get exposed to local culture as well. And then also just kind of form the discussion group as well. You know, a lot of girls like me, we love to talk. And then some people are just looking for people to talk to. And then if you give them time, patiently listening, I really think that giving time to people is the best gift. And a blessing for those people you want to serve. And then there's so many things, like, for example, midterm and finals, our international house give out little care packages. If you don't have the time, get something from the market and then give it to them and then just tell them that you care. I think that could be a very good encouragement, that at least something makes them feel like people want to love them and want to care for them. And then special events like Lunar New Year, Valentine's Day, Halloween, for a lot of students, they don't always have the access to get to the local people. But then, I think reaching out to organizations or international house and welcoming them to your home, to celebrations, that I know that so many Americans are doing that already, because we still get those kind of like collaboration partnership emails, like, oh, and also one thing is could be very, very significant is to help them move.
Yes,
it's not just for the first phase, because most of the students will move like according to their stage of studies, and then usually it's like once a year if they don't renew their contract or they found roommates. So coordinating if there's secondhand furniture and help them to move because they don't have trucks. So yeah, there are so many practical ways. If you're not good at talking, but you can do heavy lifting, that's also one way to encourage students over here. So Lindsey, what are your future plans? Do you ever thought about going back to China or do something else?
Yeah, actually, part of that 3 years of like transitioning here, I finally feel like I'm at a place where I'm like content in Chicago, but I came back 2016 and it's 2022. So it's been like almost 6 years. And I still, like, for at least like the 3 years right after, I went back to China every year. And that tension of like, where's home? And like, I always feel like China is my second home. So I always feel like I could go back to China. I'm currently learning Korean. So I also want to go to Korea so I can learn the language, because I just feel like I need to go have an immersive experience. But yeah, Asia's like part of my heart kind of forever. So that will never change. And I do feel like I live a very like detached lifestyle, as in like I could easily, like, I'm in a sublease right now. Like I don't even have a lease. I'm just like paying my friend, or like I can easily get rid of my stuff. So I think there's that always, I don't know, always ready to go kind of feeling in me. The pandemic's been hard because I haven't been able to travel back and see friends, and some of them have had babies and there's children I haven't met yet. So there's a lot of like definitely future trips to China to see friends once, borders are open and things like that. But yeah, I kind of going back to the idea of like, I feel like at home everywhere, like open to any culture. I don't know if I will be living back in East Asia, but that's definitely where a lot of my linguistic abilities, I mean, I speak Spanish too. So there's even like Latin America, there's so many potential places to go. But the beautiful thing is I have students from all these countries every day in my office. So I get to be part of that kind of return to Asia every time. We celebrated Lunar New Year recently. And one of my students brought me like homemade dumplings that her mom made, and they were so good. And like, I can't get those, at a restaurant, but I have a Chinese student who's bringing me dumplings. So like, I just feel like what a blessing, what a gift to have students here now. So even though I'm not in China, I can still be with my Chinese students and experience a lot of the food and culture and things and celebration, right? Like I celebrated with my Korean friends, my Chinese friends, I still got to celebrate even though I'm not in China. So I think that's part of the beauty of where I am now. So I don't know where I'll be, Ping, but part of my heart is always going to be in Asia for sure.
Yes. How can people find you?
So if you want to connect, you can definitely connect with me on LinkedIn. I put that there. And then of course I would call you. So if you really do want to talk to me, send me a message on LinkedIn. And then we can set up a phone call. I would be happy to talk to anyone, and anyone who's considering a career as like an international student advisor or working in international office. I think oftentimes we forget that there's like careers in this. Like I was talking about being a triangle. If you're listening to this and you feel like, hey, I'm one of those triangle people, like I did study abroad or I did these mission trips abroad, and I don't know how to continue that, but I love working with people from other countries and cultures. Consider careers in international education. I'd be happy to talk with you. Like my favorite thing to do is dream with people. So dreaming about these potential futures or career paths, I really love that. I got to connect with Ping at Vision conference. And I also met some others who were, thinking about that, like, where's their career path going? So I love talking with you if you have that question in your head, like, hey, I want to make this part of my career path, like, what is it like, day to day? And I would be happy to share more. So definitely find me on LinkedIn, and then we can go from there. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for coming.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Ping. Take care.
Thanks for listening to Chai with Ping. If you think someone will benefit from this episode, don't forget to share it with them. You can also follow us on Facebook and Instagram. If you like my show, you can buy me some chai with small donations. Details are in the episode notes. Till next time.